So yes, welcome everyone. It's great to see you here. So before we kick off, just a couple of housekeeping things and a bit of an overview of today's session and the festival. So for those who don't know me, I'm Milena, Learning and Comms Manager at London Funders. And many of you on this call have attended the Festival of Learning in previous years. And I just saw some of you on one of the sessions that finished an hour ago. So you'll get this feel all over again, but for the benefit of those who are attending the festival for the very first time. So this is our sort of annual flagship learning event. It's an opportunity for London Funders members to come together over the space of 2 weeks to share learning and ideas, be inspired by others in the funding community and in civil society. We have a really packed program this year, over 35 sessions categorized under 8 core themes, which are collaboration, equity, participation, place, process, systems change, risk and resilience. I promise that by the end of this festival, I know them all on the top of my head. But yeah, so we have loads of great sessions, including this one, which is being recorded. And this is to help us write up the post-festival report and share the learning from today with the whole of London Funders membership. So we're also encouraging speakers and attendees to get involved online. So do feel free to share what you're learning from this session through social media. We would also encourage you to let us know which organisation you're joining us from the chat. Also to keep your camera on if you're comfortable. And I think that's all the sort of boring bits out of the way. So for this session, we are going to be sharing learning from London Funders project, which we started last year. And it's about mapping the current state of funding for equity and justice infrastructure. So we're joined by Shreya, our research and evidence manager, who is going to share the findings from that research. We're then going to hear from an excellent panel of speakers who have experience in funding or supporting infrastructure for equity and justice groups. That's including the Black Funding Network, the Pathway Fund, and the National Lottery Community Fund. And they'll get a chance to introduce themselves in a little bit. There will then be time for some Q&A, so you can ask them some questions. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes, where you get to kind of go into smaller group discussions and share your own learning and what resonated with you from these findings. So yes, I think that's the agenda for today. Going to hand over to Shreya, who will share the findings from the research that's been done so far.
Thanks, Milena. Hi, everyone. I'm Shreya. I'm the Research and Evidence Manager. I'm going to share my screen, so just give me a moment. I hope you can see my screen. Thank you. I will talk you through some of the quantitative data work that we have done to map the funding landscape for equity and justice infrastructure organizations. So we were able to map about 218 organizations across the UK that we categorized as equity and justice infrastructure organizations. And for our definition, we were focusing on specialist infrastructure groups that were providing capacity building type support to equity-led groups. So frontline organizations working on issues relating to social justice and social equity. Out of these 218 organizations, we were only able to include data for 182 for now, because they were available on the England and Wales Charity Commission. For the organizations from Scotland and Northern Ireland, the data looked a bit different because they're stored on a different Charity Commission website. So we just have included spotlights as we go down that you'll see. So just to keep something in mind, that this data that you'll see now is from the 182 organizations. We also divided them into equity and justice infrastructure focus, so organizations that mainly focused on equity and justice infrastructure projects and services, and other equity and justice infrastructure providers. This was done because we noticed that there were a lot of other general organizations that were also providing support in the sector, and we did want to include them, even if they were providing only one or a few services that could be included for this project. We also saw quite a few CICs pop up, and this was substantiated by our interviews as well. There were many more CICs, companies, informal groups that were working in the sector. That was not included in the data set, but will be included through qualitative interviews and case studies. This should be unsurprising, but we found that the funding levels have declined over the past 5 years. We also saw that the funding decline was sharper for equity and justice infrastructure focused organizations that were providing services in London. This might be because obviously the number of organizations included in this list was much smaller. So you can see that that's only 28 organizations. But this was also substantiated by interviews, and this might be because there's a higher need in London or demand experienced by these organizations, and cost of living has also increased quite a lot in the past 5 years. We also added a line of inflation to compare how what the real value of funding has looked like in the past 5 years. And as you can see, it's quite a decline. I'm going to filter through different categories and different classifications. So you can see across all categories, we see a decline, especially in 2023. It goes back up in 2024, but still doesn't really match up to prior levels, especially when you account for the cost of living crisis. We also categorize these organizations based on their primary focus area, so the issues that they were working in. We recognized that all the organizations that we had included were intersectional organizations, so they were working across multiple issue areas, but we only used their primary issue areas assigned to them based on how they describe themselves on their website for this analysis. We noticed funding decline or stagnation across all issue areas. And in interviews, they also reported seeing higher demand from the sector, and they were unable to meet this demand due to low funding. While funding has declined across both ENJ-focused organizations and general organizations, the funding fluctuations are much sharper for equity and justice only organizations as opposed to general organizations. We think it might be because general organizations obviously have other projects and other diverse sources of funding. They focus on a range of issues and are often funded by local authorities and through government contracts. We also noticed that organizations were more dependent on other funding sources, so not on government contracts or grants. But in some subsectors or some focus areas, government contracts and government grants make up for a large chunk of their funding. Over the years, other funding sources have declined. As you can see, it goes from 69 to 58 and then 59 in 2024. Income coming from government grants and contracts has increased, especially from contracts. You see there's an increase from 13% to 21% in 2024. Interviews also mentioned this in their interviews. They mentioned depending on precarious contracts that are short-term, are project-based or restricted. And because of this, they were unable to often retain their workforce because these contracts might be sometimes for 6 months to 12 months. And they mentioned losing a lot of knowledge because of that workforce issue. We have also started mapping where these organizations are providing their services, but obviously this comes from Charity Commission data, and we recognize that organizations often only report their office, like where they're registered to Charity Commission, so this might not be the most accurate, but it starts to build a picture of better service provision in urban hubs, which, if you account for the population density and the need across urban hubs, would make sense. Focusing on London, out of the 218 organizations, 55 were in London. And for these out of these 30 organizations, for 27 of them, we were able to find their accounts data on Charity Commission. From that, we manually looked at restricted versus unrestricted sources of funding, and that has been visualized here. As you can see, most of their funding comes from restricted sources, and over the past 5 years, restricted funding has significantly increased. Again, we also map them across boroughs, but this is based on Charity Commission data and might not be completely accurate. We also mapped the top 10 funders who were funding based on the size of grants awarded between 2020 and 2024. This is that list. Moving on to Scotland and Northern Ireland, obviously very little data was available. We were only able to map 6 organizations in Scotland and 6 in Northern Ireland. Data was only available for 4 years, from 2021 to 2024. We're working on getting more data directly from these organizations, but we're still waiting for them to send that to us. Even then, funding did decline, and this was substantiated again by stakeholder interviews, where organizations mentioned cuts in statutory funding, but also cuts in funding from other funding sources, so independent foundations. The decline in Northern Ireland seems sharper, but this might also be because, one, there were only 6 organizations that were included, but also out of those 6, only 3 reported their 2024 funding data. So that might explain this sharp decline. Those are some of the main findings. I will hand it back over to Milena. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shreya. Really helpful taster of some of the findings. We're going to come to our panel now. So we have the Black Funding Network, the Pathway Fund, and a National Lottery joining us to share some of those learnings. So I'm going to first ask you to introduce yourself and then share a bit about the approach that you are taking to supporting equity and justice infrastructure. Patricia, perhaps I can come to you first.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Black Funding Network, we're the smallest of the organizations that you will be talking with today. And we are we call ourselves a giving circle. We're a collective giving organization that is focused on intentionally supporting very small Black-led grassroots community organizations with both funding, and again, not on the level of congratulations, the Pathway Fund on their dormant assets gift, and obviously the National Lottery Community Fund, not at that scale. We give small grants, but we find that the grants we give are consequential for the types of organizations we support. And we also are building a community of support and resources for the organizations that we back, so that they have the opportunity, the breathing space, the specialist skills to be able to continue their important work. And in addition to Black Funding Network, for this conversation, I'm on the board of Runnymede Trust, And I am also on the investment committee of Better Society Capital from an institutional infrastructure perspective. Yeah, and I'm very happy to be here and delighted to share thinking around this important subject. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Patricia. And yeah, look forward to hearing more about kind of that community you're building and how you're building that skill set of those organisations as well. Swati, can I come to you next?
Thank you. Yes. Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here. I'm Swati from Pathway Fund. We are a social investment wholesaler, so essentially something similar to Better Society Capital and Access Foundation. We invest in charities and social enterprises through infrastructure organizations, and as Patricia just mentioned, we have the ability to sort of deploy the dormant asset funding. We are the smallest wholesaler, the newest wholesaler, but in the sense of where we're at right now, we have as of now deployed a very small proportion of dormant assets from a previous deployment from the government, and now with the new deployment being finally announced this week, we are looking forward to continuing dormant asset deployment, as well as potentially other sources of funding into charities and social enterprises. Our investment lens is very much racial equity, so we invest with a racial equity lens, and although as a social investment wholesaler, we're not only a grant funder. We deploy sort of, if we look at the spectrum of capital, we're looking to be active across sort of social investment up to grant making. So we do provide grant capital to charities and social enterprises through infrastructure organizations, through fund managers and intermediaries. But at the same time, we're also looking at building their financial resilience, building their investment readiness, and moving into the space of social investment. So not necessarily limiting not necessarily only focusing on providing grants, but really also looking at how do we build the investment readiness of the organizations and move towards more also repayable and at a later stage potentially also return seeking capital. So we at present we do grants, repayable grants, and blended capital. But in the future, we're also looking to build products that are more repayable and return seeking. That's us, and yeah, I mean, very very much looking forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you so much, Swati, and really interesting to hear about that social investment piece as well. And that is something other London Fund members are thinking about as well. So looking forward to hearing your thinking. Katie.
Hi, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Katie Jowett. My previous name was Katie Bart, so some of you may know me by that. I got married recently, so I changed my name. I'm a content manager at the National Lottery Community Fund. So my role involves using evidence from our funding and the rest of the sector to kind of improve our understanding and help community groups find out what good practice is and what works. We're obviously quite established and quite big. We're quite a broad funder of community activity. We distribute roughly at least 13,000 grants a year. And that's for work that supports a wide range of things like children and young people, health and well-being, community cohesion, environmental sustainability. And we do also fund infrastructure, and we do that in kind of three main ways and three mechanisms that I'll give you a very brief run through of. So sometimes we give individual grants to infrastructure organizations to help them develop their work. So for example, they might want to create new online resources to support groups or set up a new opportunity for networking. And that can be funded through some of our open grant programs. And we also sometimes run dedicated funding programs for infrastructure. And we've done a few of these over the years. Most recently, we had a program called Access to Resilience in Northern Ireland. And that distributed dormant assets funding to network and anchor organisations to allow them to provide better support and build the capacity of small community groups with a particular focus on groups most in need. So, for example, NICVA and CO3 have received a grant, and they'll be using that funding to support small VCSE organisations representing ethnically minoritized people across Northern Ireland. And we're constantly developing new sort of funding programs across our portfolios. And finally, another approach is through externally delegated agreements. So sometimes, another organisation will actually distribute the money to the sector. And one great example of this is the LGBT plus Futures Equity Fund, which was about 3 years ago now. That was an externally delegated agreement with the LGBT plus consortium. They awarded over £500,000 to organisations supporting intersectional LGBT plus communities. And there's a great evaluation of that fund, which found that it really supported that part of the sector. Grant holders improved their abilities to collect data and learn, to fundraise, to connect with other organisations. So yeah, that was a really good program that the consortium delivered. So those are the three main ways. That's not an exhaustive list. That's just the primary sort of ways that we support infrastructure, and we're constantly sort of developing and wanting to learn more and see how else we can support the sector.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. So we have some really diverse experience from all of you, I think. But Patricia, I want to come back to you first and ask just what have some of the biggest sort of learning points been for you in supporting equity and justice infrastructure and those groups? What are sort of some of the challenges and needs that you've picked up on in your work?
I guess because we focus very much on very small organizations, they are the least likely to receive some of the more traditional and mainstream funding from mainstream funders, perhaps some of those here on this call. And what we've found, honestly, first of all, that the work that is being done at community level is truly incredible, and they are doing it operating on sometimes just on fumes in terms of volunteer and just their own just focus and commitment. But right now in these quite challenging times economically, of course, some of the sort of political headwinds also that organizations are facing. We've found that it's been, so our approach as a giving circle and trying to build a community of support, it's a large part of it is just giving visibility to what the work is, what are the needs in those communities. Too many times, and we bring every event we have, we bring 60, 80, sometimes 100 individuals, either as private, sort of donors or representing their organizations and their companies together. And when they get to meet, we present 3 organizations at a time to talk about their work. People leave our events really sort of shocked and surprised in some ways about what is the need. And we support organizations across a lot of different areas, youth, social mobility, health, well-being, crime and justice, just and arts and history and education and so many different dimensions. But people kind of walk away sort of just scratching their heads, sort of saying, oh, the need is so vast. And these small organizations are really stepping in to the gaps left by, government, either local or national or, other areas. And so that encourages people to want to do something, and we find that in addition to donating, which of course is really important, they are actually willing to volunteer and contribute their own skills if they're lawyers, accountants, marketers, so on. They're willing to sort of put their hands up to support. So I think in trying to reclaim what we call philanthropy for community, as opposed to being seen as some elitist effort, I think we are tapping in, to a real, I feel, a growing movement of what is collective giving. There are 4,000 giving circles around the world, moving billions and billions of dollars in reality. So there is momentum, and there is a sense of solidarity. And again, in these kind of challenging times, that sense of solidarity is really quite important. It allows all of us to feel we are making a difference, and I think that is really what we're trying to showcase and promote as much as possible.
Thank you, Patricia, and also really encouraging, I think, to hear about donors sort of giving more than just money, that they're giving the skills that they have as lawyers or other sort of professions to the work as well. Swati, can I come to you next in terms of lessons for you for supporting justice and equity infrastructure?
Yes, absolutely, and completely echo everything Patricia has just said. We, like I mentioned, we are a social investment wholesaler, so we do invest into infrastructure organizations and into fund managers. We work with intermediary organizations to then provide funding to charities and social enterprises, frontline organizations. And in the sort of last month or so, we've also been doing a regional roundtables across England. We have one in Birmingham tomorrow, and then we have a few more lined up through June and into the first week of July. Roundtables with local organizations across different regions. And overwhelmingly, what we are hearing is really around early stage support, the need for early stage support, the need for sort of what we would call pre-investment funding, pre-investment capacity building support, and really patient, flexible capital to enable organizations to fill the voids that have been left in the sector. In our communities. The other thing that Pathway does is also we run a we've run a incubation program for fund managers. So first time fund manager incubator, which we've completed our first cohort, working with 3 first-time Black and ethnic minoritized-led fund managers. The program focuses on supporting them to build their first fund. What we see is really the fund management, the asset management world, as we would all know, is not at all diverse, and the lack of representation, lack of decision making by people who have the cultural competencies of the communities that we're trying to support. That is another very big gap that we have found, and the Fund Manager Incubator Program is one such way in which we're working with organizations, with teams that are interested in building their funds. We've worked with both sort of venture capital, PEVC focused funds, as well as social investment fund managers, and that sort of capacity building need, again, very prominent gap we have found. And yes, the other learning that we have is really also around trust building and the lack of trust in the in existing systems, particularly from people from Black and ethnic minoritized communities. They've had experiences where, you know, a lot of grassroots organizations believe that they've been rejected funding, or they've not had the opportunities and the access. So the trust building itself is also a very big piece of work that needs to be done. And one of the things that we're seeing is that we work um, with local infrastructure organizations. So one product that we are right now delivering is funded through dormant assets. It's an enterprise grant in Lancashire, and we're working with a local infrastructure organization called Inclusive North, previously called Lancashire BME Network. And just recently, actually, just 2 weeks ago, we were in Lancashire for one of our regional roundtables, and what we have seen across this program is the level of work that local infrastructure organizations have done in building the trust, in supporting grassroots organizations. That is work that they haven't fully been compensated for, but they have been doing extreme level of, you know, like the organizations are putting, as Patricia said, so much of volunteer hours, so much of like their personal passions into building that. And that there is a huge need, but also the fact that the grassroots organizations do trust these organizations, us sort of coming in there without the local infrastructure organizations, we could never just come in and try to build that trust. There is so much of work that has been done by communities, by you know, local organizations, grassroots organizations, and as funders, we need to make sure that that we how do I explain this, that we, you know, we are benefiting from the fact that this work has been done, but we're actually funding this work to continue in a sustainable and in a long term, in a way that is feasible in the long term, because the risk of losing a lot of this work because of lack of funding, because of lack of support, is absolutely there.
Thank you so much, Swati. A really interesting point about that trust building, that not only is there a kind of lack of trust in funders, but also larger, more general infrastructure groups who don't have that expertise or connection to local grassroots communities, which is, yeah, something we're obviously trying to assess kind of the state of that through this research. So it's a really interesting point. Thank you. Katie, I want to come to you next for lessons learned.
Yeah, so firstly, I want to acknowledge that I'm not an expert, and at the fund we're not claiming to be an authority or expert on this by any means. There's always more for us to learn as a funder. But last year we did do a little bit of digging to fill some gaps in our knowledge. So as part of that, we spoke to 41 infrastructure organisations, some grant holders, some not grant holders, specialists and generalists, to kind of get a picture of what was available. And we were specifically looking at capacity building. So what tailored support is there for sort of minoritized community groups to build their capacity? And we kind of drew out, we learned a lot from it, but there are kind of 5 main findings that I want to share specifically for funders to think about. So first of all, it really solidified the role of specialist infrastructure organizations as part of a wider ecosystem of support in the sector. And really, we heard a lot of what Swati and Patricia have already said, actually, what we were hearing really echoed what they've just said. They do really important work. They are drawing on an absolute wealth of expertise and experience of the communities that they work in to provide really appropriate support that takes inequalities and systemic barriers into account. So, for example, leadership development support for disabled people's organizations might look a bit different. It might involve recognizing barriers in the system, talking through their experiences of ableism, So it's really bespoke stuff that generalist organisations and infrastructure organisations can't really be expected to do. So yeah, really great work being done. But it's hard to figure out exactly where the gaps are and where to target funding without being really grounded in the local area. So each region and devolved country, as we've seen, it has its own organisations working in different ways and within quite different funding landscapes. So we found that it was really the people working in the local sector, including our local funding officers, who really had a good sense of who was doing what. So you can't get that purely from desk-based research from the other side of the country. Like, the sector might look one way on paper, but in reality, you don't know what their relationship is with local groups or who could be acting as infrastructure without really labeling themselves that way or plastering on their website. You have to kind of be there to understand what's available and what isn't. One of the main things that came up time and time again, of course, was the long-term core cost funding that's quite thin on the ground, but is really desperately needed. And it's especially important for equity and justice sector, where they need that time to establish and strengthen relationships and trust with communities that we know is so important. Take the time to develop leaders, build partnerships with others in the space. And as Shreya said earlier, that short-term project funding is quite unstable, and it can be hard to know if it's really making a lasting difference as well. Long-term funding is what's needed, especially for any kind of systems change. So we know that much. We also found that there's a real appetite for partnership working between generalists and specialists, but it's not always smooth sailing. So it takes continued and really conscious effort to not kind of step on each other's toes. You know, when there's two organizations working in the same area, they need to work together to make sure they're not duplicating. And relationships can also become quite strained if different infrastructure organizations end up competing for the same funding or contracts. And generalists also need to be mindful that they're not being extractive. So as we've already heard, you know, getting help from specialist organizations to reach certain communities and then not necessarily giving back to the organizations that helped them. So those partnerships really take ongoing work on both sides, but they can be really, really great and productive for everyone when they're done well. And finally, the last thing to think about as funders is that we could play a role in strengthening the evidence base for specialist support. There's a relative lack of long-term impact evidence for specialist equity and justice infrastructure. We've got lots of engagement statistics about how many organizations, how many people are attending webinars or accessing one-to-one support or joining networks. But I think we could do a bit more to demonstrate what groups are getting from that support in the long term. And it can be quite difficult to measure because it might involve following up over a long period of time and also recognizing that good outcomes will be unique to each group that's supported. But in our experience, we found that case studies are quite a good way to do that. So we recently wrote up a case study of an organization that had one of the first ever National Lottery grants in 1995. And we spoke to them and we were able to unpick how that grant has affected and impacted the way that they run even 30 years later. And it is potentially possible to do that with infrastructure and development support. But again, it's that's just one approach. And we could ask ourselves firstly, what kind of evidence we want to see, and secondly, how our funding can help infrastructure to plan for that long-term evaluation. And it could also help us understand like what works in this space. So what can we do as funders to support that? That's it for me. I'll stop talking.
Thank you.